Yeah.
So there's a tool that, you talked about it being very sort of pragmatic and not
Yeah.
so fluffy. There's a tool that I call it the hero mindset,
Hmm.
or the hero mind map. And basically what I do is I say, okay, pick a hero, pick somebody that you look up to, that you admire, that you want to be like. We really break it down. That's, what are their qualities? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? And how would they show up in these different scenarios?
Yeah.
What would they say if they were faced with this kind of conflict, or if they were really exhausted or frustrated, right? How would they show up in all these different scenarios? And then I just do that as kind of a prepping exercise. And I say, okay, now imagine yourself as your hero. Imagine yourself 5 years into the future, when you're the
Yeah.
absolute best version of yourself, where you're even better than whoever this person is that you're looking up to. How would that person show up and behave, and what would they think, and what would they say in all of these different scenarios? And then, okay, how do we start doing that?
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
How do we apply that to the situation here? So I'll bring it back if there's some conflict or some struggle or whatever. Okay, what would future you, super you, say about this, or how would they approach this situation?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's just a very intentional way to say, you want to become this superstar CEO, or executive. Okay, let's actually map that out, and then let's just bring that into the present and just start doing it.
Yeah.
Right? Which is another agile principle, which is like, stop thinking, start doing, and
So
learn
true.
along the way.
So
Yeah.
true.
Awesome.
And I find the same actually for personal branding, because one is for leadership and leadership identity, and
Mm-hmm.
how you show up at difficult conversations, how you show up when, you need to inspire people, etc. But your personal brand is kind of a little bit, it's a very similar approach, right? So
Mm-hmm.
as a CEO, you want to build a personal brand. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be necessarily quantity in terms of what you put out there, but people need to look you up and get a good first impression, right?
Yeah.
What does this person stand for beyond their current company? It's
Mm-hmm.
not only about the role that you're in right now, but really, what do you stand for? What is the impact you want to make? What is it that drives you? Maybe that's why you even started the current company, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
reverse engineering back the personal brand strategy, almost like you would reverse engineer a leadership identity or even a business strategy, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Where do you want to publish? What do you want to talk about? What do you want to stand for? What's your hero? What's your archetype of your
Yeah.
brand? And yeah, I find it super, super helpful. And I actually just did a workshop on that during a CEO retreat, and a few people actually really actioned it afterwards, and they were like,
Mm-hmm.
I have so much clarity now on what to do. Before, I felt like for 4 years I just was stuck, and I was like, what am I going to talk about today on LinkedIn? And then it was so random, I had no strategy to it, couldn't delegate in any way to their team because there was
Yeah.
nothing that tied it together of what the end result looked like.
Yeah.
So just that approach of what's the end result, how do we reverse engineer it, and strategic planning, sitting back and just thinking, and then planning, and then doing. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a good approach.
Yeah. I do something kind of similar, but with a little different angle, where I think about personal brand also as internally in the company.
Yeah,
What's
yeah,
your brand to your team? What's your brand to your investors? What's your brand to your customers?
yeah.
So, for folks that maybe aren't as concerned with being public, or sort of being a public figure, you still have a personal brand, whether you do it intentionally or not. You have an identity, you have an archetype, and it's either crafted, or it's natural. But so I think about the same thing. If I need to address my team, if there's some great thing that we need to celebrate, or some defeat that we need to rally around, um, how do I want to communicate that? What kind of talent do I want to attract, right? And what kind of leader would they naturally follow?
Yeah.
And all those sorts of things, right? When a customer gets an email or a newsletter or something, and they see my face on it, how do I want them to resonate with me?
Yeah.
And then, yeah, okay, now just make that public. The same kind of things you're saying, the same things you're doing, just take that and now just put that out there in the world, and there's your
Yeah.
personal brand.
And
Um,
it's important to know what you stand for. And there are some people who are just no BS. We want to execute performance. This is not a nice culture. We all respect each other, but this is just kind of the company I want to build. And if you want to build that, then be very transparent with that, because that's the kind of people who you're going to get on your bus, and they're going to be so excited, no bullshit. We're just going to execute. And then you have others who just want to be a little bit more in a, touchy-feely startup culture, and that's totally fine as well. Just be very open and, straightforward with that. And your culture is kind of an extension of that, of your personal brand internally, oftentimes.
Yeah.
You kind of have to balance it out a little bit if you're a little bit too directive leadership versus, being a servant leader. Just have the self-awareness and know, okay, I'm leaning more towards either side, and maybe I get an HR or a COO, person who's balancing me a little bit. But just having that self-awareness, right? Where is my personality and where's my strength?
Yeah, so here in San Diego, we have a lot of biotech companies, and so I work with several of them, and a lot of them are very serious, very no nonsense. And I say, that's great. So then the mission needs to speak for itself, right? The mission is going to be the thing that attracts people, because okay, we don't have all of the, the fluffy stuff, but this is serious. What we're doing here, this is serious business. Lives are at stake, and so we show up every day with that seriousness, and that's actually, like you said, something that people are drawn to. A lot of scientists and engineers and whatnot who would be attracted to. Hey, I'm not here to play around and have fun or do something sexy. I'm here to make a real difference and a real impact in people's lives, and I'm going to take pride in that when I show up to work every day. So that absolutely is a viable personal brand, as long as you're not, just sort of being a jerk.
Absolutely. I work with a client, and they have it's a completely remote, no meeting policy. Everything is discussed over text, Slack, email.
Wow.
So you have absolutely no meetings, only if you're the CEO, you have your direct reports. And then the team meetings, I think, are once a week or something, but there's no one-on-one, none of that. So it attracts a very specific kind of person, usually engineers, very analytical people, right? Which is great. They love it. They don't have to be sitting in front of other people all day long. But then you obviously run the risk that you have a very, let's say, not a very diverse workforce. Everybody's quite similar in their thinking, and probably also in their approach to solutions and problem solving. And so again, just knowing, okay, where are we leaning and what can balance that out, I think is super helpful. Or to have a couple of very bubbly people in there, or who are really good salespeople, who are just super, keen to engage people and bring new people on board and have them feel at home right away. So I think,
That's what this is all about, right? It's about being intentional about every facet of your business that you're creating, and being transparent about it as well, so that you're naturally filtering and naturally attracting the right people, right?
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear a story from you. Can you share, is there a specific client? I mean, if you can name them, great. If not, it's okay. But I'd love to hear someone who came to you really full of chaos in one of these, key areas, right? Organization, people, and self. And, where there was a major transformation, and where they're at today.
Lots of examples, dozens and dozens. I would say, because we're a little bit on the CEO leadership today and focused in and zoomed in on this a little bit. There was a client. I started working with him end of last year, and he was supposed to be promoted into the role as the CEO, but he was apparently not a very great leader, and a little bit more, I would say, on the directive side. And the rest of the team didn't really feel so comfortable for him to be promoted into the role. And we worked together for about 4 weeks, and he completely changed. From one day to the next, something went off.
Wow.
And he just realized the role that he was going to be put in, and the responsibility that he was going to have, and the impact he was going to have on others. And the feedback that he's gotten from his 360, and we did the whole mindset metric assessment as well, and how that influences others, and how that even influences your own state, and how you lead yourself. And he just realized something where he went into a complete different different approach of his leadership.
Hmm.
And when I sat in the strategy day and the offsite that we did following the first, I think it was after the first 3 or 4 months, he was a complete coach to the team. I mean, he stepped back, facilitated, asked them for the answers. 180-degree difference. And it's not necessarily the coaching, right? Sometimes you just have to ask the right questions, give them the
Hmm.
right information, which in this case was 360, and doing the self-assessment on the energy leaderships that I mentioned earlier, and that was enough. And I think he saw the potential of changing the culture of the whole company.
Hmm.
It's a 350 people company, and very much a blame culture, I would say, when we started, and the way he approached the company offsite and how they communicated and engaged the team in the goal setting and party setting, completely different feeling. I mean, he was just
Hmm.
like this just complete game changer. And sometimes you have an extreme like this. I would say oftentimes people are already very self-aware, or they already know, okay, there is really potential in how we can change the business and the culture.
Hmm.
So
So
usually there's
I'm
already,
curious here. So again, I don't want to coach vicariously, but I'm curious. So what I would, if I had seen that kind of turnaround, what I would think is this person was acting, the old way wasn't really them. They were acting that way because they felt they had to for some reason, and that they were willing to let go of it and go to a place that was maybe even more natural for them. Why do you think this person was being so directive? And then why do you think it was so sort of quick or easy for them to let that go and change course?
I think it was what you said is very accurate, but
Mm.
I don't think it was only in this role. I think it was
Mm.
probably the whole career.
Yeah.
And also
Yeah.
the personality was very directive and very type A. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm very type A as well. And I softened
Mm.
over the years a little bit. And I'm like, oh, actually, you achieve your goals much faster when you actually engage people rather than when you force them.
Wow.
Wow. So
Yeah.
I think just having those realizations and getting the feedback,
Yeah.
I think it just makes your work life so much better and easier when
Mm-hmm.
you then,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you're then the CEO and you can influence the rest of the team. If the
Yeah.
rest of your team is your peers because you're on the C level, they are on the C level, it's very hard to make those shifts. But once you're the CEO, it's kind of, well, now,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to set the tone. So it's much
Yeah.
easier to do that. I think there was still a little bit of fine tuning on how do I do that, but what if people just don't do it? How can I, practice the patience?
Yeah.
But yeah,
So
we
the necessity made them willing to try new things. And then
exactly.
was there some initial, traction or results that made them say, oh, wow, this is actually working. Let me keep going.
Yeah, so the whole idea is to almost artificially create situations where you create confirmation bias. And I
Mm-hmm.
think you need only 3 to 5 situations where you basically convince yourself that the opposite of what you were thinking before or what you believe to be true before,
Mm-hmm.
that you see the opposite happening. And
Mm-hmm.
after 3, 4 times, you actually believe it. So
Yeah.
before you cannot think your way out of a way of acting, right? You have to act your way out of a
Act
way of
first.
thinking. So it's this whole,
Um,
well, just try it a few times and you will see that actually the result is going to be different. And we artificially create those situations. It doesn't have to be big situations. It can be a conversation with your chairman, can be a conversation with a colleague who you thought hates you, can be
mm-hmm.
a different approach of trying to achieve a certain result with your engineering team where it never worked before and now
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden works, right? Because we took a different approach. It's those little things where
Mm-hmm.
you don't go from, oh, I really believe this to I believe the opposite. It's more,
Mm-hmm.
I believe this. Actually, do I really believe it? Is
Mm.
there any other option as well that could also be true? Could this option be true? Okay, this option is true. So you kind of start convincing yourself. Yeah.
That's
So yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes it's really into like the person themselves, and sometimes it's just in the business. and you make changes in the business, and people just completely change their way of engaging with each other, because they feel like, oh, I don't have to hold everybody accountable here. I don't have to follow up with everybody because there's a system in place, there's a routine, progress is tracked, everybody knows what they're doing, and there's just an expectation. And it just relieves the team from having to hold it all together with their bare hands, really.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, I use some metaphors kind of around this as well, where it's like, imagine if you have a bunch of different, balls that you have to move, and you had to go to each one and push them and then move and then push the next one and then push the next one and push the next one and keep doing that. And then you go round robin, right? To get to the end, you're having to go and push everything to get to the end, versus if it was a pull where either, somebody else is doing the pushing, or there's wheels on the thing, or it's, going downhill, where you can guide it, you can point it in the right direction, and then it goes under its own steam or its own momentum.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's much, much easier to do. So I focus with my clients that are feeling that they're having to push, which is a lot of what management is. A lot of micromanagement is pushing. Let's take that energy and instead focus on the outcome, right? Let's focus on the vision. Let's focus on getting really clear expectations of what we're trying to deliver. Make sure that we've got the systems and the process and the tools in place so that the track is set, right?
Yeah.
Give them some incentive, some motivation, and then a little nudge is all you need.
I think it's super important to also really understand how your role grows as the business grows and how your responsibilities change. And some CEOs still hold on to very early stage responsibilities, and they just shouldn't. And then the leaders just feel like, do you think I'm not capable to do this? Or do you want to micromanage me? Or is there anything I'm doing wrong? So just for you as the CEO to update your responsibilities every 6 months, I would say. If you're in a hyper growth, 100% every 6 months. If you have co-founders, if you have a COO, maybe even more often, more frequently. So your role changes, and you can also just reverse engineer your diary a little bit, your calendar. We're in the US, right?
Yeah. Was that how you call it, diary?
But those simple things where you just know, okay, these are my high impact activities, and this is when I'm going to do them, and this is how many hours I'm going to budget for them, and whatever I don't get done, these are the people I'm gonna delegate it to. And sometimes you just don't have the right people, and oftentimes one of the first questions I ask is there anybody you need to let go? Honestly, that you've been thinking of for the past 7-8 months, and you just try to push it away, you try to not think about it, and just maybe things are going to get better. But if you keep, especially in your exec team, in your VP level, on your C level, if you keep a couple of people who are just not capable, you're going to be doing 4 people's jobs. Like, it's just impossible. It's impossible to then become a great CEO. So if you don't have a great team, you really can't be a great CEO. Maybe if there's one. But even then, I mean, imagine you have a bad CFO who just completely miscalculates. I mean, I just had a situation with a client where it's just like, oh my God, our burn is so much higher than we thought. And the CFO was just not able to flag it.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, you just have to do double the work afterwards, right? So
not only do you have to, take the reins back and do whatever the work was that you had delegated, but now, because that trust is broken, now there's this layer of management that's going to suck up your time for as long as that person is still there, right? Until you can maybe somewhere way down the line rebuild that trust.
And usually then
I do a kind of similar thing where I ask about that. Is there anybody that you think that isn't a good fit for the team? And then I pause for a second, and then I say the name. I know it. They're right there. They're in your brain. They're right there. Just say the word. What's the person's name? And they say, okay, bleh, and they just blurt it out. And I say, okay, now let's dig into this person and talk about what, maybe what went wrong. Is there anything that we can do? How do we set them up for success? And basically have they're either in or they're out, right? In a very brief period of time. And we go kind of a similar thing, the mind map, right? Like, well, what would the right person be doing in this role? And can we take and go through that whole process? And then can we take this person and turn them into that person? And if not, then we need to go find that person.
Yeah. And especially as a manager of that person, you maybe deal with them once or twice a week on a one-on-one in a team meeting. Think
Hmm.
about the rest of the C-level who has to deal with that person all day long.
Yeah.
Your moral and the exec team is just gonna die because you're like, well, if that person can act this way, no, like either completely toxic leader, no accountability whatsoever, never follows through, etc. Why would I do my job? You have one mold apple, right? I don't know
Hmm.
what's the
Hmm.
saying, but
Hmm.
one mold apple destroys the bunch. It's so true, though. It's so true.
Perfect.
I would
Yeah.
say probably 2 months, and that's it. Like give them a little warning, depending on, put them on a performance plan. But
Yeah.
then really, once you have your exec team in place and everybody's great and you own your diary, you have a good assistant, and
Hmm.
I know it's harder than it seems, but keeping your diary clear
Yeah.
of meetings on certain days and certain times and just really focusing on the right things, focusing on high impact, having your focus time and get stuff done. You you
Yeah.
you reverse engineer
That's
great
it.
CEO-ship, right?
Yeah. I have a very similar model. I call it calendar control, but
Yeah.
you identify these areas that you know you should be focusing on, and we move stuff around. We get things out of the way. We delegate. We cancel meetings and whatnot. We make this space, and then I check in with it. I say, okay, you're gonna go. You're gonna have this time. It might be an hour, 2 hour block that's dedicated to this thing, and you might show up at that block and be like, what do I do? I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fill this time, and I want to just go off and go do some other urgent thing, right? That's I say, no, you've got to sit there. You got to sit there in that space, that limbo of I know I need to grow in this area, but I actually don't know what to do, where to start. And
Yeah.
then just journal, right? Just think, maybe read a little bit, right? But just slowly but surely build up that muscle until we can start doing. And that's a really hard thing for especially the type A CEOs to do is like you're going to have a time that is going to feel like dead time because you haven't built that muscle yet. So we
Mhm.
actually have to sit there in that discomfort and really, again, just collect our thoughts, and then the muscle will
Yeah.
start building. Yeah.
I like for them to actually pre-schedule it. So let's say you have fundraising, you have building your
Hmm.
personal brand, you have whatever it is, right? Founder-led sales, whatever your focus time is, probably five, six main responsibilities, and you have probably a to-do list under each one of them or
Hmm.
out objectives, right? I said CEO OKRs, just like I said company and engineering OKRs and sales OKRs. I said CEO OKRs, and what are the outcomes? And if you have five OKRs or four OKRs those are your five or four different areas, right? And
Yeah.
those need to go into your focus time. And usually I would say probably 1 to maybe 2 days or 1.5 days a week. We just have uninterrupted time. And you look at your at your CEO OKRs, and you have already pre-scheduled. You would just put it in your
Hmm.
calendar. These are the things under each area that I'm going to do. So you never get into the focus time without knowing what to do.
Mm.
Because that's when you actually then fill it up with other stuff, or your EA books it through and you're like, books over it, and you're like, well, I didn't really know what to do anyways, or whatever. Right? So
Right. So
it
all
already
else
has to
fails,
be.
that focus, the purpose of the focus time is to create the list of things that you need to do with all the rest of the focus time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. So we're just a couple minutes left before we wrap. You had touched on something a minute ago that really resonated with me. That is the transition from being kind of an early stage founder to a scale stage founder. So maybe just sort of wrap up with what would be some advice or some things to keep an eye on for founders that are kind of growing out of the startup stage, getting into scale, but they haven't matured yet as a leader.
I think the main difference is that now all of a sudden you have really capable high level C levels around you, and
Mm-hmm.
probably people who are more senior than you,
Hmm.
or let's say if you're a first time founder, maybe even 10, 15 years older than you, right? Who knows?
Yeah.
How do you show up in a way that they want to follow you? That's a
Mm-hmm.
big challenge. And let's say if they are, similar age, that's not really the big difference, or you're quite senior, to still know that I want to have the best person who, in this field in the role. I don't have to be the best at it, and then I get somebody and I just delegate it to them, but I really have them own this function. And that's why it's so important to have really highly capable people, because you cannot have somebody own a function and really delegate it and really trust them if you don't know if they are great.
Mm-hmm.
So your team is just, that's your key to becoming a great CEO. Hiring an exceptional COO at one point, I would say probably 150, 200 employees around that stage. Some do it a little earlier, some a little later. But if you have a great COO who really complements you, also in your personality, but obviously also just practical, experience and skills, you can just at 400 or 500 people really step back, and you can really get your time back and just think very differently about your business than if you don't have a good team in place. And
Mm-hmm.
both have their advantages and disadvantages. Sometimes with a more junior exec team, you have less politics, and they still
Mm-hmm.
look to the CEO and they're like, whatever you need. It's good in some ways, but then in other ways, obviously, you cannot just leave the business for 6 weeks and maybe go to the US and just launch a new product, or help open another office, or fundraise, or whatever it is, or just take a
Mm-hmm.
vacation
Yeah.
after 10 years of building. So, yeah, I would say that the exec team is the key.
Yeah.
And if you can
Definitely.
get that right, it's going to save so much headache in the future. And the
Amazing.
people who have their exec team in place over years and years and years, they are just like a sports team, right? They just know where do I belong on the field, and
Mm-hmm.
I perfected my craft here, and I just play in a team. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And
I
there's
would say that
trust.
that would be the one thing.
Yeah, amazing. Well, Katy, it has been such a pleasure getting to talk to you today. So insightful, so many amazing tidbits that our audience can put into play. But if anybody wants to reach out, they can go to katytrost.com. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.